Hey, it's the Religious Studies Project. I'm David Robertson.
I'm Christopher Cotter.
And this week, we're delighted to bring you an interview with Merinda Simmons and Mike Altman, which was recorded by my good colleague, Christopher Cotter. And the subject is Reinventing Graduate Education in the Study of Religion. Reinventing Religious. It's almost like a book that came out recently. Let's pass over to Chris.
We spent quite a lot of time on the Religious Studies Project discussing religious studies as a discipline or field of study, what it means to study religion with or without quotation marks, and what exactly it is that the critical scholarly study of societal discourses surrounding religion might have to offer. However, up until today, we've never tackled head-on the institutional location of religious studies within a higher education environment that is becoming increasingly stretched and dominated by market forces and political whims. In particular, how might this situation affect graduate education in the study of religion? What can scholars of religion do about this situation? Are we powerless? Must we simply sit on the sidelines and stick to our guns? Or are there constructive, alternative ways forward? To discuss these questions and an exciting new graduate program looking at religion in culture, I'm joined today by Drs. Merinda Simmons and Michael Altman, who are both Associate Professors of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama. Merinda's books include Changing the Subject, Writing Women Across the African Diaspora, and two co-edited volumes, The Trouble with Post-Blackness and Race and Displacement. She's the editor of the book series Concepts in the Study of Religion, Critical Primers, and is a member of the collaborative research group Culture on the Edge. Mike's research ranges from American religious history to critical theory, and his first book, Heathen Hindu, American Representations of India, 1721 to 1893, will be published by OUP in 2017. And he's also published an article in the journal Religion entitled Podcasting Religious Studies that features the Religious Studies Project, and we might even discuss that later on. Who knows? So first of all, Merinda, Mike, welcome to the Religious Studies Project.
Thank you.
Thanks. You gave me a free promotion there, Chris. I'm only an assistant professor.
Congratulations.
Oh, no.
It's okay. It's okay. I'll take it.
You can take
That's
that.
how
That's
good
fine.
the book is.
That's right.
You get instant promotion when that happens. Excellent. Okay, well, on that note, I mean, that's a institutional dynamic that we don't quite know here in the UK, the associate assistant. But we're talking today about reinventing graduate education in the study of religion, but why are we even talking about that? What's the context? I sort of laid it out a little bit there, but...
Yeah, I mean, one of the conversations that we've been having over the past handful of years has been about what a lot of people call the, crisis in the humanities. So that's really what began the conversation here departmentally. We have a humanities speaker series that our chair is on the committee for planning. We've been doing some things within the department to try to talk about that issue. We also have been, also again, like in the last handful of years, especially, kind of on the front end of social media in the department, making videos, doing all things to promote the department, because a lot of people don't come into their undergraduate programs anyway, knowing what the academic study of religion is. So we have to do a lot of like self-promotion and just getting the word out about what it is to even get a degree in religious studies. So with those two things in mind, with our social media presence and with the conversations that have been going on among our faculty about the so-called crisis of the humanities, that's really what began the conversation of, well, what would it look like if we don't want to think about the humanities as crisisville. We all have jobs in this space of perceived crisis. So maybe we should be thinking about that or doing something about that, or what does it mean to reconceive that? So that's a background for where the conversation initially began.
And just for the benefit of our of our listeners who could be at any level, I mean,
what is that
this
crisis?
Yeah,
I don't know.
broad brushstrokes.
It's I mean, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. It's a shift. I mean, I was introduced to this crisis through the 2008 financial crisis. That's when I snuck into graduate school just before Emory University's endowment tanked in 2008 in September. And you could just look around over the next 2 years and watch all the free lunches on campus literally go away. And I think that moment of that financial moment and the impact it had on jobs in the U.S. Kind of created a bit of a panic about, well, if I'm going to spend money on a degree, if I'm going to spend time on a degree, especially at the undergraduate level where you had a financial crisis happening as a bubble was growing around higher ed and higher ed prices were going up, if I'm taking out all these student loans, I better damn well be able to get a job when it's over. And I think the idea that the humanities, because they were not very vocational, didn't prepare one for that, I think became a long-standing discussion point and problem point since the 70s, really, even more acute. And so students came in, I think, as I transitioned out of grad school into teaching in the past 4 years, I've seen these are all undergraduate students who were in high school or middle school when this happened, and they don't know a world that wasn't in financial where financial anxiety was a dominant, right? I feel like I grew up in a world dominated by terrorism fear. They grew up in a world dominated by banking and stock market fear.
I mean, I think that there's also at the same time there, like when I came to grad school, which was like in 2001, 2002. I was exposed to a kind of generational shift from the faculty perspective, where I think the reason that again this so-called crisis is resonating for academics themselves is that there was also a kind of sea change from a faculty perspective and from an academics perspective about what it meant to study the humanities. Suddenly, in response to these kinds of economic factors and the sorts of anxieties about job markets that our students were grappling with, suddenly it didn't make as much sense to approach one's teaching and one's research in quite the same sort of classic model of, I know all, I will tell all, come learn at my feet, and then take this knowledge to do whatever, but that's your thing to process later. And it's not really so much my jam as your faculty advisor. So, in response to that shifting landscape too, I think that there's been, within people who already have jobs and who are trying to kind of get a sense of what they're doing as faculty within the humanities and scholars in the humanities, what it is that our job is, because it doesn't seem like it's quite so much the same sort of just receptacles of knowledge that we dispense nebulously to people, and then just take that as self-evidently important, as some kind of service that we're doing them.
Yeah, for better or worse, the sort of self-evidence of the value of humanities research isn't taken for granted anymore.
Right. And so that's a thing for students who want to go get jobs have to grapple with, but then it's also a thing for the, those of us doing research in the humanities to also kind of start reconceiving as well. So, into that space, enter cutting edge new grad program.
Wonderful. And that really does, it scans quite well with my impression of things here in the UK, where we certainly don't have college fees to quite the same level as you have there in the States. But when I started as an undergrad, you were talking just about £1,000 a year, and now it's gone up to £9,000 a year in that length of time. So there's a real, a shift towards, okay, what am I going to get out of this? Students as consumers, and also the perceived value of, well, a degree in studying religion. That's near the bottom of the pile in terms of monetization, isn't it?
Right.
But
not
need it all
necessarily
be doom and gloom. Need it all be doom and gloom. So you've been well. First of all, before we talk about your graduate program, graduate students are going to be slightly different to undergraduate students. So again, maybe if you just tell us a little bit about that dynamic, and then let's see what you've been doing.
Different. You mean just like what do we conceive of as our student cohort coming in, or like the
the general sort of purposes of graduate school.
Oh, gotcha.
That's a whole bee's nest of questions. I mean, there's like there's an ongoing argument in the U.S. about graduate school. There was an article yesterday in the Chronicle or this week about basically wagging its finger at literature professors around the country saying your entire career is built on the exploitation of graduate students. And yet at the same time, I've become such a reactionary old man at the age of 32, but like you're getting paid to go to school in lots of cases. I mean, yeah, don't take out, but so there's a whole back and forth, about graduate school and there's a whole conflation of different programs and the way they rely on graduate student labor to teach large classes, which keeps costs down and buttresses the explosion of administrations and administrative costs. So like there's a big argument going on about the value, the importance, the ethics of graduate education in the U.S. That I think we're trying to navigate, and we've thought hard about. Like I want people to know. I think the committee who's been working on this, both from the proposal level all the way now to the implementation, took those concerns very seriously. But they're very real and they're very thorny, I think.
I mean, Mike and I were just talking about this earlier. I think before the economy changed so dramatically, there was a sense that education and more of it was just a net gain. Education is an end in itself. It is always a good. The more you get of it, the more it will enrich your life or pay you back monetarily or just be this kind of net gain to pursue. And I do think that as we've been already discussing, those dynamics have shifted a bit. But I don't think that that means that just because students are interested in making sure that they try to at least stack the odds for some kind of professional return on their investment, that they leave their BA programs without still this kind of sense of like, I don't know necessarily if I have this very specific career path set out ahead of me. I still am interested in all of these ideas that I've only just barely been exposed to. What do I want to do with those? Is there a space for me to continue to think about things in more depth? So, I don't want there to be a kind of mutually exclusive sort of antagonistic relationship between professional security or job sensibility on one hand and intellectual curiosity on the other. And so our sense was, one approach from academia, I think in a lot of ways has been to sort of stake its flag in and just sort of double down on what we study is super important. Did you hear? I'll say it louder for the kids in the back. It is super important. Or on the other side, they just turn into a kind of profit machine, which I think results in the and maybe those two things work together. I don't know that those are even two sides of the same coin. Maybe they're the same thing. But so there's this kind of exploitative factory of grad student labor on one hand and contingent adjunct labor that even spreads into the faculty arena. But there's also, I think, there's been an ongoing failure, I think is not too strong a word, on behalf of academicians to rethink and retool why it is what we study matters and why that should translate to student interest and to the lives that they're living, because their interest is does not live and die with their intellectual pursuits inside of that classroom. It's also about the lives that they want to live. It's also about the jobs they want to have or the place they want to live. It's geographical concerns. It's family concerns. It's all sorts of different kinds of things. And so to try to think seriously about all of those issues, is the job for people in the humanities in the 21st century now.
Excellent. So that's set a really good scene. So your department, is your department called Religion in Culture, or is it the I know that's quite a thing at Alabama.
Yeah, with the italics on the end. Gotta have the.
We have a web page explaining our approach to that.
Yeah. No, the department is the Department of Religious Studies, but when we came up with the master's, I don't know who had the idea. I think it was on an email.
We went back and forth about it. Yeah.
We decided that to just call it the MA in Religion and Culture.
And it's not quite. I mean, my PhD is from an English department. Another colleague's PhD is from an anthropology department. We come at the study of religion from a lot of different disciplinary angles, and we knew that this wasn't going to be a traditional religious studies degree as it kind of gets popularly conceived still in the academy. But we also wanted to establish it as an intervention into that field where a lot of us still do have a great deal of stake. But it's not quite cultural studies. We didn't want to go completely off the grid, but so it's our attempt at kind of, charting out a specific path within a field that we all still, have a great deal of stock in.
And so you're approaching it sort of with two broad strands then, social theory and digital humanities. Why those choices?
I'll pitch this one to Mike with a little bit of background because he's one of our resident digital humanities gurus. But for me, again, with a background and training in literary theory, the reason I'm in a religious studies department is because of a commitment to social theory and questions about identity studies, and a kind of critical theory analytic that's operative in a lot of my work. And so the department has a long-standing commitment to thinking broadly about why it is that we study what we study rather than, just kind of landing upon the self-evidency of why what we do matters. So in that sense, social theory has been something that we've been already flexing our muscles with for quite a number of years. But again, then we also kind of just got into the social media thing. It started with just, advertising events on campus through Facebook and then having a Facebook page for our student association. But then our students started writing blog posts and then, maybe we should have a blog. And then, so we were, so the grad degree is emphasizing two strengths that we already had. We're not inventing anew either of these two platforms, but it is, especially for me, who still is, relatively new to the digital humanities scene, taking it in a kind of new and more substantive direction, especially with the public humanities bit, which is then my my pitch to Mike.
I think of it as really the two strengths of the department, and I think for a long time, because of Merinda's work and Stephen Ramey's work and Russell McCutcheon's work, our department has been known for its theoretical rigor, theoretical swagger. I like to think of it as. And so I think that's manifest in this program. Like if you're a student and you don't want to be hemmed in by the same school of religious theorists, or if you are even thinking about religious theorists, if you don't want to be hemmed in by a content area, then that's sort of what we've envisioned, beginning with this. One of the two classes students take, one of the first classes students take in this program is this foundations course in social theory, and they get introduced to a whole bunch of social theorists. This is something Merinda's helped develop with Stephen Ramey. And she can say more about that. But then the other side, I think people have known less until the past couple of years it's sort of blossomed is like we were one of the first departments to really utilize a website and to do all sorts of things. I mean, back in the day when before cell phone cameras, I wasn't here. I don't know what I was doing, but I was in high school. They were taking photographs at events and scanning them and putting them up on the webpage. And it was Russell and the faculty that were there then, Russell McCutcheon, sort of. And so that website predates Facebook. There was no Facebook, but we had this website that has, and it's actually about to get a facelift, soon, but you can go look at the archives of all this old stuff that we have buried in that website if you're really interested in
and so much of that is, again, like this sense of trying to tell students what it is that we do in this department, because, often they come out of high school without a sense of what religious studies as this kind of academic space is. And so I think that there is this hard work of just self-awareness, but then self-promotion and advertising that a department like ours has to do. And so since we've been doing that for so long already, and since we have this analytical, approach by and large, how do we make the most of both of those two things?
Yeah. And so the website gave way to Facebook, gave way to the blog that was invented under Ted Trosny. He was chaired to pump what began as a promotion of the humanities series on campus, but then became this blog that is now read internationally, and people actually send us guest posts because I think it's become a pretty interesting space in the field. I mean, I'm a little biased, but and now our Twitter feed is doing really well, and we have an Instagram, and so there's we've done all sorts of videos, and so this is sort of, I look at this as the next step in both those aspects of the department that have been going for the past 12 years. And actually, I think we have a podcast coming up soon of our own, that I was just talking to Russell McCutcheon as I was recording that. And there's a great interview with him where he talks about this and the way that actually the two are more connected than you think. Like we posit them as, there's going to be a foundations class in social theory and then a foundations class in sort of public humanities and digital methods, that I'm put together with Nathan Lowen. But they work together because really all the stuff we've begun to do in the social media space on the website is just applying social theory to our own environment. Like, why do we have a blog? Because getting students to write little pieces and see them creates a sense of, it's Durkheim. Like, we're just we ought to know. I mean, academics who study religion from a kind of social theory, social sciences, whatever, human science perspective, ought to be really good at understanding how to form a tight social group. That's what we're studying. That's the things we're talking about. And we've kind of taken that seriously in a way. And so there's a way that these two things feed off one another and have in the life of the department. And now we're kind of sending that momentum spinning forward into this graduate program.
It also means that the kinds of, so their culminating thesis project can be a traditional, publishable academic work that will, send them to, a PhD program of their choice or into a different kind of academic arena. But they can also, for their thesis requirement, do a digital project of equal substantive weight and value. And so thinking seriously about what that looks like and what that means, how to make them marketable, not just in relation to how they can talk about themselves and their own skill sets, which I think is just such a thing that grad students could use, because I think that a lot of them, with all of these kinds of critical skills, writing skills, editing skills, argumentative skills, can only really talk about themselves or think about themselves in relation to the professoriate, which I think is a shame, because I think that those skills are super marketable and very much in demand across a lot of different kinds of job sectors. So not only will they be able to talk about themselves and think about their skills differently, but also will like have a thing in hand that they can go to a museum with, or to a nonprofit with, or to academic publishing, or a
startup,
or what, I mean, you know, whatever kind of, and to help them get creative about where they can take those skills, and something, you know, equipped with something that isn't, just a, you know, I have this killer essay that makes this amazing critical intervention. So they can do both.
Just we've been nattering away here, and time is already running away with this. This sounds fantastic, and it sounds sort of right in the same ballpark as why we started the Religious Studies project 5 years ago, to try and find a way to get academia out there in a more accessible form. But two questions, building, just to maybe finish with. One would be, so you know, stereotypical student wants to come and do a master's in the study of religion, and they find themselves getting social theory, digital humanities. I can well imagine, based on some experiences that I've encountered, a sort of jarring sense of, where's the religion here? I just wanted to study some Buddhists.
Sure.
So that's one side. And then the other question is, it sounds like you've got a really supportive department and university there. I can imagine in a perhaps more I'll use the word like straight-laced or traditional university, that you might meet some resistance to proposing a course of this nature. So what advice might you have for scholars of religion who are trying to are working within the same context as you and trying to instill the same sort of sense of excitement and career development into their students, but maybe can't quite found this innovative course? So there's on the one hand, the where's the religion, and two, advice for others in different contexts.
Well, I mean, to the first, there, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, we are still a Department of Religious Studies and can still call ourselves that, right? So whatever kind of nominal traction we have to make ourselves legible in a field called religious studies is still present in the kinds of faculty areas and research that we do. Our approach is different, though, in relation to how it is that we think about the importance of the question of Hindus and American religion, or whatever kind of, or a colleague who studies, you know, global Christianity and the spreads of global Christianities in the global South, and Japan migration. And so, I mean, like, we have areas of the world and traditions that we use as data sets. There's still you know, levels of study that people can kind of come into and get that sort of traction if they want to do that, especially if they want to go on to have an even more focused approach with that with their PhD. They have the opportunity to do language study while they're here within the master's program. But, you know, yeah, I mean, it is right that, you know, someone who's coming into our program is probably not satisfied with thinking about, you know, a specific group of, you know, ritual practitioners in the 18th century from this space who, and then kind of like leave their inquiry to kind of live and die inside of that space.
Yeah.
So,
and given the what you're already saying about your blog, your social media presence, etc., it's going to be quite unlikely that a grad student's going to turn up on the door not knowing what goes on.
Right. Well,
they should certainly know that. Yeah, they should certainly know they're getting themselves into.
But I do think it deserves to be said that this is still for those people who are really still diehard interested in getting a PhD in religious studies, as long as they think that approach is kind of cool. This is still something that will, you know, still put them in a really nice position, and I think, if anything, make their application stand out because they do have this other little edge to it.
I think, to be completely honest, I think that we will make our students coming out of here will be better prepared for more traditional PhD programs because our program will require them to go back to first questions that take it that from the like we said earlier, that take it for granted that your study of Vedic sacrifice and it is valuable just because it's about something really old and not that it is inherently valuable. You're going to be pushed to be able to articulate what is it about your study of ancient Vedic sacrifice that has purchase for larger theories about social formation, ritual, the way communities work, the way people think, the way texts are passed down, like whatever, something bigger. And that emphasis will it'll allow you, when you go to a PhD program and beyond, when you go on the job market later, to talk to people outside of your super small specialty in a way that will make you a better scholar.
And I think that's exactly the answer too that I would suggest for the second part of your question, Chris, about why, what this suggests to scholars implicitly in the field, because I think that there is a way in which the field itself as a disciplinary phenomenon can also kind of be taken for granted as a self-evidently important thing.
Of course religion's important.
Right. And just because we've been studying it in these ways for these many years, this is what we should continue to do, or because the field is so dominated by area studies and continues to be dominated by area studies and descriptive ethnographies, that's how we should continue to approach our work. And I think that our program is a experiment in thinking otherwise about that, and really putting our programmatic money where our mouths are in terms of thinking differently about how we could conceive this field, because there's a lot of different directions it can take, and why do we need to think in classic terms about area studies? Because then why should we win the battle over how to get grad students who would otherwise go into a history grad program or a cultural studies or an anthropology, or why go into religious studies? And so I think that this is also a way for scholars and faculty members and administrators to think about how to organize differently around the kinds of area studies that they have, and how to make more marketable students coming out of those programs in the process.
And I mean, I want to underline, you asked the second question about how are we able to sort of do this and the support. At the risk of sounding too parochial, I think we have had a lot of support from the College of Arts and Sciences here at the university. And I think that's because we've shown that the approaches we've chosen work in other settings. We've been out in front of other departments in a lot of ways with the blog and the social media and a number of different projects that we've done that I think have sort of pushed everyone in the college in a way. And so that's given us a certain amount of, I think, institutional capital that has opened the door for this. And I think part of that is because we haven't taken for granted that we're valuable, and and the flip side is I think we're the hardest working department of the country. We're incredibly productive pound for pound, and I mean that's enough bragging. But
I will say our dean of the College of Arts and Sciences is a mathematician who is nonetheless deeply invested in the humanities, and that's just so nice.
Yeah,
it's just really nice.
So effectively, get out there, embody what you want the field to be. If you want to be relevant, get out there and make yourselves relevant. That's probably a good kind of rallying call.
The entrepreneurism we want in our master's students has been modeled by this department for the past 10 to 12 years.
And interestingly, I know you're probably trying to close this down, but it's a because it sounded like a nice, kind of like and scene. And scene. But only very quickly that, this is why social theory, I think, is so useful too, to make that entrepreneurial vein of professional emphasis not become some super problematic, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, kiddos, and if you just try hard enough, you'll get that job in blah, blah, blah. No, we're thinking really seriously about structural dynamics, about power dynamics, about the kinds of economic underpinnings that create certain sorts of environments that allow you to take various modes of agency in different kinds of spaces. And I think that that's also super important, because I think it can be really disheartening as a grad student to hear the equation of, if you just try hard and if you just publish enough, you'll get that job, because that's just so not anymore the case.
Yeah. I mean, again, scholars of large institutions and social formations ought to be really good at navigating the university bureaucracy.
Well, on that note, thanks so much, Merinda Simmons and Mike Altman, for joining us, and hopefully you will both get some sign-ups for this course out of this
Applications
podcast, but
are
also
open now.
Applications are open now.
You've also given our listeners a lot of food for thought and a lot of inspiration, and hopefully we'll have a couple of interesting responses to this. That's what fingers crossed. Afterwards.
Thanks for talking with us, Chris.
Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Chris.
No bother. Well, listeners, that was a very enjoyable interview for me to record over the wonders of Skype, with some excellent microphones, I think, at both ends there. Hopefully you've enjoyed that, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. It was a good sales pitch for that course at Alabama. And I know that we are also, as I mentioned in the interview, at Edinburgh, been involved in a good bit of discussion about, the sort of post-grad masters, particularly in religious studies, and what that might mean, what student expectations are, and what the purpose of it is.
And part of my job at the OU now is thinking about these kind of things and using these emergent technologies to better facilitate community and discussion in different forms of education.
Exactly. And, we can only sit for so much of the time going, you just don't understand what religious studies is meant to be. You can only sit on the sidelines crying that for so long before you go, actually, what are people wanting from a degree, and how can we make it work?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been a central concern of ours since since before we even started the project, was, how can this be useful for education? There were people doing podcasts before us, and there were people talking about using them in education. In fact, there was people making them for education, but it was actually thinking about both. How can you make these work together? How can you make that format perfectly, or, better work for education? Not perfect, not that arrogant. How can we make this format work with education and so that and improve education, not as a bolt-on extra that ticks some boxes in your public outreach, but actually using it to improve education and student engagement. So that's close to our hearts.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for making that happen, and a big shout out to Daddy McCutcheon for facilitating that, setting that up as well. It was really good, and that's Russell to his friends.
Yes. Sort of lurking across religious studies like a puppet master pulling strings behind the scenes. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
That is excellent. We're getting a bit giddy here, folks. That's the way we like it. That's the way we like it.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of essay marking. So,
well, yes, or supposed to be. Next week, it's another interview from RSP legend Thomas J. The Voice Coleman III. And he's been speaking to Luke Galen. He's been on the RSP before, and the topic of the interview is misplaced faith, ? A theory of supernatural belief as misattribution. So that should be quite interesting, and I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about after that. So come back for that. Come back for the response. Check out our Opportunities Digest. Check out all our social media feeds. And if you do want to help support the project, you can through our various Amazon links that are listed on the website. And a big shout out to our sponsors, of course. Who are they, David?
They are the BASR, the NAASR, and the IAHR.
Never has there been so much R in one section of podcast.
We thank you all, and we thank you, the listener, for listening.